Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, taxpayers' money is being wasted on propping up rents in a failing housing market, according to the National Housing Federation. The organisation says money spent on housing benefit has risen from approximately £16 billion in the mid-1990s to over £25 billion today. It added that since 2011, no government money has been made available to build homes in England for low-paid people to rent. Well, the government says building more homes was its absolute priority. Well, with me in the studio is David Smith from the Residential Landlords Association, and also Andrew Spooner, who is a resident of a housing association property. And we're hoping to speak to Ruth Davidson from the National Housing Federation in the next few minutes. But Andrew, I want to start with you. Just explain to us, if you would, the benefits you think there are to living in social housing.
Well, I mean, obviously I can only speak from my perspective and my experience, and I think for me, at the point where I was offered social housing, which was 25 years ago, I mean, I'd been homeless, I'd had specific issues, health problems and stuff at that time, and it provided a sort of level of stability for me that then gave me a sort of platform from which to go to university, establish myself a bit more. Originally, I lived in what's called a housing cooperative on the South Bank in Waterloo, quite well known, on Coin Street, and it's a self-managed housing association. So the tenants there managed their own. We managed our own property. We looked after our own garden. So it was kind of like a housing association with strong tenant involvement. The rents were very low. So then it means you've got, I think one of the things is, when your rents are low, you've got disposable income. So then you can be spending money in the wider economy. So a lot of the people who live there, I think there were some grants coming in occasionally to renovate property and stuff like that. But we were entirely self-sufficient. The rent that went in paid for everything. So we weren't sort of being subsidised in a massive way by the state. So there is those benefits, and I think that. And there was a kind of real cross-section of the community, civil servants, artists, a lot of cabbies, a lot of bad cab drivers. So there was a real cross-section of the community living there. And I think we've kind of got away from that with this tag of social housing as opposed to public housing, where public housing was sort of for everybody, rather than social housing, which is just for the poor and just for the sort of people who are really struggling. And I think in London, particularly in the southeast, because if you look at the rest of the country, rents and house prices are not as dramatic. You can get a bit trapped within the sort of public housing sector. It's very hard for me now to make the decision on the street I live in to buy a one-bedroom flat. It's £500,000, and I'm not going to be able to afford that. So you kind of get a bit trapped within that sort of setup. So there's a kind of benefits and drawbacks, I suppose.
David, the issue that has come out in this report today is that it costs £21 more every week to put someone in private housing rather than social housing. That is housing benefit, and many people would say that is wasted money.
Well, that's a carefully picked statistic. Of course, that ignores the fact that private sector landlords pay tax, whereas, of course, social landlords as charities generally don't. So, in fact, private landlords put some of the money back into the system that they're getting. I think it's a very unfortunate attack by the social landlord sector. At the end of the day, I completely agree that the government has not invested enough in housing across the board. And certainly the caps on social housing investment are wrong, and they should be lifted immediately. And I would hope that the Chancellor will think very carefully about that in his budget shortly. But to suggest that private sector landlords are profiteering off housing benefit is completely unreasonable. If you look in 2016, the top 10 highest paid chief executives in social housing earned £250,000 or more each. The highest paid was paid £500,000, and most of them took pay rises of more than 10%. That's not exactly an industry in crisis. But
the reality of the situation is that private rents are more expensive than social housing. And also, we heard there from Andrew, the security aspect of it. Many people, they maybe only have a rental agreement with a private landlord for 6 months or a year. Now, if you've got a family, if you've got children in schools, that can be very unsettling, can't it? Yes, rents are high, and that's completely true. You should bear in mind, however, that social housing rents are rising faster than private sector rents because the government has insisted that they should. So on average, they're actually increasing faster.
across the board.
I was going to say, actually, I think George Osborne brought in the policy, I don't know if it's still there, that rent should go down, social housing rent should go down 1% every year. So my rent's actually gone down over the last year. So I'm not so sure.
Significantly?
Well, 1%. It's gone down 1%.
But new rents are going up and are being charged at a higher level. And of course, David Orr actually is also calling for social landlords to be able to charge higher rents still than they currently are. So he's trying to push the amount of money up that they will take. I
mean, I've got friends who've lived in who've had private landlords, and I had a friend, she was a single mother, and it came to the point where her contract was being renewed. The landlord started to make kind of almost like sexual advances on her, and she rebuffed them, and then she was sort of, the tenancy wasn't renewed. So there is these issues, and I guess I feel that, I personally recognise that there should be private landlords, and it's an important part of the sector, but I'd like to see private landlords behaving more socially responsible, maybe looking to give longer contracts, maybe acting to agree to not put the rents up so high. Maybe the government could be involved with that and reducing tax for landlords if they sign up to that kind of agreement. But I just think that there has to be a sort of like a non-ideological kind of way of resolving this. The state, the private sector, the third sector, all working together to find solutions, because people are struggling out there, and it does affect the wider economy because people aren't spending money. I mean, people in London paying £1,000 or £1,200 a month in the private sector for one studio flat. If they were paying £800, they'd have £400 a month extra in their pocket, and that would be...
I completely agree. I'm certainly not going to defend landlords who make sexual advances towards tenants. That's completely ridiculous and outrageous behaviour. And if landlords are doing that, then I think they should be taking up the sector completely.
I want to bring in Ruth Davidson. We were hoping to speak to her from our Birmingham studio, but things seem to have conspired against us, and there's been a fire alarm. So Ruth is very kindly joining us on the phone. Ruth, I don't know how much you managed to hear there of Andrew's solution of what he thinks needs to be done, but what is the view of the National Housing Federation about what needs to be done to address the housing crisis?
Yeah, so I heard a tiny little bit of that, I'm afraid, and no more. But basically, we've gone from a situation where government was spending more than £11 billion 6 years ago in terms of building homes, bricks and mortar, to spending just £5 billion on that. But overall, the amount that they're spending in terms of spend on housing is £30 billion. It's just that 25 billion is housing benefit, and 9 billion is going to the pockets of private landlords. And there is a place for private landlords, there's a place for all types of housing in the market, but that is just dead money as far as housing is concerned. You spend the money with social landlords, and any profits that are made are reinvested in building homes. There's a big opportunity at the moment for the Chancellor. There's £1 billion in a pot that was there for starter homes. Now, it's good that governments innovate and try new things, but starter homes have not worked, and there's not been proper take-up. They could take that £1 billion and they could spend it now and get 20,000 genuinely affordable housing. And over time, that will bring the benefit bill down.
I've already made the point. I mean, profits are reinvested, but a lot of people get paid first, and they get paid a lot. So most private sector landlords are basic rate taxpayers. Most of them own 1 or 2 homes, and most of them are there holding these properties as pensions. At the end of the day, they have been providing these houses. Yes, absolutely, we should have more social housing, but simply criticising the private sector is not the way to achieve it. The government needs to build more homes across the board of every type.
Thank you.
There's absolutely no disagreement from me on that, and it's not a criticism of private landlords. What I'm saying is that basically, if we build genuinely affordable homes, as well as investing in homes for sale and shared ownership, that the genuinely affordable rental homes, they're cheaper than renting in the private rented sector. There are economic benefits in terms of cementing jobs in places and bringing new jobs, and there are longer tenancies. They're more stable homes for people to bring up families and for those families to thrive. The government is making interventions in every bit of the housing market at the minute. It's just not putting any money behind genuinely affordable rents, and it needs to do that. Okay. And as I said, there's an opportunity there at the minute. There's £1.1 billion which is sat there that could be used to build 20,000 genuinely affordable homes.
Ruth, thank you for joining us. Of course, the government will say that it is a top priority to look at building more housing. So thank you for joining us anyway.